Happy July 4th. Happy Independence Day, America. It's been my experience in my 20-some years of life that a lot of Americans, a lot of people I know, don't have a clear understanding of why we're celebrating today or what we're celebrating. So my intentions today are to help clarify some of those things. Now, I've been told that I have quite an unusual obsession, I would say passion, for American history for July 4th. And so because of that, I'm taking it upon myself to help us to understand exactly what we are celebrating today. Now, July 4th, 1776 was the day that the Second Continental Congress actually signed the Declaration of Independence. Now, 2 days prior, July 2nd, is when it was voted on and agreed on, and then they signed it on July 4th. The Second Continental Congress was a group of colonists that were delegates from each of the 13 original colonies. Now, at this time, we are under the Kingdom of Great Britain, the King George and Parliament's control. And there were many things that the King and Parliament were doing, policies and laws, that the colonists felt were infringing on their rights. When they originally met, several of them wanted to stay a part of the kingdom. They even created an olive branch petition where they hoped that some policies could change and they could remain unified under the British rule. Now, many of the delegates believed that that would not be possible and that they would have to have a completely new independent country. Eventually, as we know from history, and we move towards July 4th, more and more delegates realized that the king was not willing to give in to some of their requests. So we created our own country. At this point, the American Revolution had already started. We've been fighting for about a year. So this declaration also really was a rally cry to our troops at the time under George Washington as our general to understand why they were fighting. I studied American Studies in college, and I've always been a lover and a student of American history. But I know that my experience of reading the Declaration of Independence regularly, maybe even once a year, is quite unusual for most American students. So I think it's important for us to understand some of these important documents, especially our founding documents, important speeches, that sort of thing in our history. And so today I am going to read for you the Declaration of Independence in its entirety. So I have my book, which includes the Constitution, and I do want to mention the Constitution is a very important document. It is the supreme law of our land. It outlines how our government is supposed to be set up and what our government is supposed to do, both our state governments, our local governments, and our national government under our federal system. The Constitution tells us how, and it is our supreme law of the land, as I mentioned. But the Declaration of Independence mostly focuses on the why our government was set up. The Declaration of Independence in Congress, July 4th, 1776. The unanimous declaration of the 13 United States of America. When, in the course of human events, it becomes necessary for one people to dissolve the political bands which have connected them with another, and to assume among the powers of the earth the separate and equal station to which the laws of nature and of nature's God entitle them, a decent respect to the opinions of mankind requires that they should declare the causes which impel them to the separation. So that's why they're writing. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. That whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, it is the right of the people to alter and to abolish it, and to institute new government, laying its foundation on such principles, and organizing its powers in such form, as to them shall seem most likely to affect their safety and happiness. Prudence indeed will dictate that governments long established should not be changed for light and transient causes, and accordingly all experience hath shown that mankind are more disposed to suffer while evils are insufferable than to right themselves by abolishing the forms to which they are accustomed. But when a long train of abuses and usurpations, pursuing invariably the same object, evinced a design to reduce them under absolute despotism, it is their right, it is their duty to throw off such government, and to provide new guards for their future security. Such has been the patient sufferance of these colonies, and such is now the necessity which constrains them to alter their former systems of government. The history of the present King of Great Britain is a history of repeated injuries and usurpations, all having in direct object the establishment of an absolute tyranny over these states. To prove this, let facts be submitted to a candid world. Now, at this point in the Declaration, we're about to get into the long list of grievances that the Second Continental Congress has with King George and Parliament. King George at this point had been the king for 16 years. It's kind of a long time, but we have to also remember that prior to that, there were other kings and queens that were in charge of the British Kingdom since the colonies were founded. But at this point, after 16 years with King George, you'll notice that a lot of these grievances, subtly or not so subtly, reference specific events or specific policies or things that happened during the 16 years that King George was ruling. I encourage you to take some extra time, as I'm not going to be able to go into all of these, to do some research on exactly what those events were. He has refused his assent to laws the most wholesome and necessary for the public good. He has forbidden his governors to pass laws of immediate and pressing importance, unless suspended in their operation, till his assent should be attained, and when so suspended, he has utterly neglected to attend to them. He has refused to pass other laws for the accommodation of large districts of people, unless those people would relinquish the right of representation in the legislature, a right inestimable to them and formidable to tyrants only. He has called together legislative bodies at places unusual, uncomfortable, and distant from the repository of their public records, for their sole purpose of fatiguing them into compliance with his measures. He has dissolved representative houses repeatedly for opposing with manly firmness his invasions on the rights of the people. He has refused for a long time after such dissolutions to cause others to be elected, whereby the legislative powers, incapable of annihilation, have returned to the people at large for their exercise, the state remaining in the meantime exposed to all the dangers of invasion from without and convulsions within. He has endeavored to prevent the population of these states for that purpose, obstructing the laws for naturalization of foreigners, refusing to pass others to encourage their migration hither, and raising the conditions of new appropriation of lands. He has obstructed the administration of justice by refusing his assent to laws for establishing judiciary powers. He has made judges dependent on his will alone for the tenure of their offices and the amount and payment of their salaries. He has erected a multitude of new offices and sent hither swarms of officers to harass our people and eat out their substance. He has kept among us, in times of peace, standing armies without the consent of our legislatures. He has effected to render the military independent of and superior to the civil power. He has combined with others to subject us to a jurisdiction foreign to our Constitution and unacknowledged by our laws, giving his assent to their acts of pretended legislation, for quartering large bodies of armed troops among us, for protecting them by a mock trial from punishment for any murders which they should commit on the inhabitants of these states, for cutting off our trade with all parts of the world, for imposing taxes on us without our consent, for depriving us in many cases of the benefits of trial by jury, for transporting us beyond seas to be tried for pretended offenses, for abolishing the free system of English laws in a neighboring province, establishing therein an arbitrary government, and enlarging its boundaries, so as to render it at once an example and fit instrument for introducing the same absolute rule in these colonies, for taking away our charters, abolishing our most valuable laws, and altering fundamentally the forms of our governments, for suspending our own legislatures and declaring themselves invested with power to legislate for us in all cases whatsoever. He has abdicated government here by declaring us out of his protection and waging war against us. He has plundered our seas, ravaged our coasts, burnt our towns, and destroyed the lives of our people. He is at this time transporting large armies of foreign mercenaries to complete the works of death, desolation, and tyranny already begun with circumstances of cruelty and perfidy scarcely paralleled in the most barbarous ages and totally unworthy the head of a civilized nation. He has constrained our fellow citizens, taking captive on the high seas, to bear arms against their country, to become the executioners of their friends and brethren, or to fall themselves by their hands. He has excited domestic insurrections amongst us, and has endeavored to bring on the inhabitants of our frontiers, the merciless Indian savages, whose known rule of warfare is an undistinguished destruction of all ages, sexes, and conditions. In every stage of these oppressions, we have petitioned for redress in the most humble terms. Our repeated petitions have been answered only by repeated injury. A prince, whose character is thus marked by every act which may define a tyrant, is unfit to be a ruler of a free people. Nor have we been wanting in attentions to our British brethren. We have warned them from time to time of attempts by their legislature to extend an unwarrantable jurisdiction over us. We have reminded them of the circumstances of our emigration and settlement here. We have appealed to their native justice and magnanimity, and we have conjured them by the ties of our common kindred to disavow these usurpations which have inevitably interrupted our connections and correspondence. They too have been deaf to the voice of justice and of consanguinity. We must therefore acquiesce in the necessity which denounces our separation, and hold them, as we hold the rest of mankind, enemies in war, and in peace, friends. We, therefore, the representatives of the United States of America, in General Congress assembled, appealing to the Supreme Judge of the world for the rectitude of our intentions, do, in the name and by the authority of the good people of these colonies, solemnly publish and declare that these united colonies are, and of right ought to be, free and independent states, that they are absolved from all allegiance to the British Crown, and that all political connection between them and the state of Great Britain is and ought to be totally dissolved, and that, as free and independent states, they have full power to levy war, conclude peace, contract alliances, establish commerce, and to do all other acts and things which independent states may of right do. And for the support of this declaration, with a firm reliance on the protection of divine providence, we mutually pledge to each other our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor. The foregoing declaration was, by order of Congress, engrossed and signed by the following. In staying true to the integrity of the document, I will read the names of those who signed the document, the Declaration of Independence. Please be patient with me as I may butcher some of these names. Largest signed was John Hancock at the top, and John Hancock presided over this Congress, so he signed separate. The rest of them signed below from the states that they were delegates. New Hampshire, Josiah Bartlett, William Whipple, Matthew Thornton. Massachusetts Bay, Samuel Adams, John Adams, Robert Treat Paine, Elbridge Gerry. Rhode Island and Company, Stephen Hopkins, William Ellery. Connecticut, Roger Sherman, Samuel Huntington, William Williams, Oliver Wolcott. Delaware, Caesar Rodney, George Reed, Thomas McKean. Maryland, Samuel Chase, William Patka, Thomas Stone, Charles Carroll of Carrollton. Virginia, George Wythe, Richard Henry Lee, Thomas Jefferson, Benjamin Harrison, Thomas Nelson Jr., Francis Lightfoot Lee, Carter Braxton. New York, William Floyd, Philip Livingston, Francis Lewis, Lewis Morris. New Jersey, Richard Stockton, John Witherspoon, Francis Hopkinson, John Hart, Abraham Clark. Pennsylvania, Robert Morris, Benjamin Rush, Benjamin Franklin, John Morton, George Clymer, James Smith, George Taylor, James Wilson, George Ross. North Carolina, William Hooper, Joseph Hughes, John Penn. South Carolina, Edward Rutledge, Thomas Hayward Jr., Thomas Lynch Jr., Arthur Middleton. Georgia, Button Gwinnett, Lyman Hall, George Walton. And that is the Declaration of Independence. Happy Independence Day. Let us always remember what we are celebrating. Be thankful for the rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And have a wonderful and blessed day.